My Lords, I declare an interest as an ambassador for UN AIDS, unpaid, and I'd like to concentrate upon health and particularly upon public health. My Lords, I remember 3 or 4 years ago intervening on a question on HIV/AIDS, and as I sat down, the member next to me on those benches said, of course, no one dies from AIDS anymore. The campaign of the 1980s was a distant memory. AIDS was no longer dominated by the headlines. But of course, his statement was not true then, and it is not true today. AIDS has been a deadly scourge which has lasted for at least 40 years. Over 33 million people have died from AIDS-related illnesses since the start of the epidemic. 33 million. Even today, we have 700,000 a year dying from AIDS in this country. Men, women and children, particularly young girls. It is an appalling toll, and one which this country must make every available effort to reduce and to eliminate. Inside the UK, we are now relatively fortunate, but even so, there are still well over 100,000 people living with HIV and all the problems that bring. Ill health, isolation, and above all, discrimination. Other countries actually have not been so fortunate. If you take Ukraine, which I visited to study their position a few years ago, before the Russian invasion, they faced one of the worst and most serious problems of HIV in Europe, mainly of injecting drugs, of any country in Europe. Russia itself was much worse. But in the last years, the position in Ukraine had improved, thanks to the work of organisations, local and international, including organisations from this country. But the position is now dramatically under challenge. The conflict has put the improvement at risk. The fact is that the country now faces formidable difficulties. The danger involved in getting drugs through and the risk to life that involves, and the plight of those who are displaced and have become refugees. So the basic point I wish to make in this very short intervention is that although public attention may have drained away from HIV and AIDS, they still pose an enormous challenge to this country and actually to the world, and one that can increase because of new events like wars. In these circumstances, I think the question is, what can Britain do to help this challenge? Prejudice is a very serious issue, and perhaps we should say this, that there have been acts of Parliament that do away with the outright persecution of people like Alan Turing. They are behind us. But in fact, that doesn't deal with the whole problem. The changing law does not mean that all attitudes have changed. As individual examples, I think, become more and more important. And at this point, could I say that I think the example of the footballer Jake Daniels of Blackpool, to take a lead by coming out as gay only a day or so ago, I think that was a magnificent example to this country. But of course, we as a country need to be generous not only inside but also outside. And I remind again the House of my interest in UN. But in my view, our record over the last few years has been deficient. Frankly, it was a hell of a time to cut back on overseas aid. Yesterday, the Foreign Secretary published a new strategy. One part of that will be to make aid delivered more directly, we assume, by the Foreign Office, and a large slice will be taken away from organisations like the United Nations and, I assume, UNAIDS. So we are planning to take resources away from organisations like the United Nations that have undoubted experience, expertise and commitment. Aid with trade may make a convenient political slogan, but it is not, I suspect, the banner under which the small army of volunteers that we have in this country march. And let us be absolutely clear, if it was not for that contribution, then I think this country would be in serious difficulties. So I am sceptical about what the Foreign Secretary is announcing. I think that the banner that young people would march under would be a banner concerned with saving lives and preventing illness, rather than some connection with trade. And so I say briefly to the government, I need to be convinced that the strategy set out by the Foreign Secretary at this stage is the right one to take this country forward.
Yeah.